This show is brought to you by SalCal Real Estate Connections.
Yes, welcome to the Telescope View. We're here tonight with the author of The Final Revelation, The Sun Project, co-host Rick Teles, and of course our favorite Martian, Steve Parker. And yours truly, Larry Mangello. And tonight's show, Rick, we're going to go back and talk about the incident at Exeter, which to this present day is still a mystery. And I'm sure you got a few things you want to talk to us about that.
Yeah, the incident at Exeter, New Hampshire still remains unexplained by the Air Force, even though some other people think they have the answer. We can talk about that. The fun thing about Exeter is it's right up the road. It's right up the road in Exeter, New Hampshire. And every year around Labor Day, they have a little celebration for the anniversary of the incident. What happened is in September of 1965, a guy by the name of Norman Muscarello, 2 police officers, and a number of other witnesses saw some strange lights in Exeter. The interesting thing is that when Norman or Muscarello viewed these, he was near a farmhouse. The farmhouse was bathed in a red light. All the farm animals were agitated, making a lot of noise. And to this day, it remains unexplained. And there's obviously more to the story.
I mean, cars are actually starting and stopping.
Cars started and stopped and then restarted themselves at one point, which today we would know is probably some type of electromagnetic interference. The police have a method of starting cars using electromagnetic tool. But it was interesting. The whole story was interesting because Norman Muscarello was on his way home. And he was walking home and he saw these lights in the woods, and they were just behind the farm. And the interesting thing is that the lights were on a 60-degree angle, and they were pulsating 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and they were red. And as he looked at these, he also noticed, he looked over and he noticed that the farmhouse was bathed in a red light, and just behind it was the barn. The animals were all squawking and squeaking and mooing, and they were very disturbed. So he ran up to the farmhouse and started banging on the door to see if these people knew what was going on. And there was no answer. So what happened is, he was so scared by this, he ran to the police station in Exeter, which was a few miles. He ran into the police station. And, excuse me, the sergeant on duty saw how upset he was, and he said, well, something's going on. So he explained what was going on. The sergeant was still a little like, well, I'm not so sure. But because he was so insistent and he was so disturbed, he sent a police officer out there with him. Excuse me. So he sent out a patrolman by the name of Bertrand. And they went back out to the farm, and when they got there, they parked the car and they got out of the car and they started to look around. And the first thing Bertrand noticed was nothing. So now he's starting to think, what's going on here? Maybe this guy was seeing something. So
what did he have to drink?
Yeah, right. What was going on?
So the lights had stopped. The house wasn't bathed in red anymore.
Right.
Plain. Okay.
So they started to walk out in the field towards the pasture and where the barn was, and all of a sudden, behind the trees, there were the lights. They came up from like they were on the ground. Bertrand saw this immediately, and he pulled his service revolver. Okay. Now, I don't know if he was going to shoot. He didn't end up shooting. He thought better not to shoot. But they observed this for a number of minutes before another police officer arrived. And he saw the same thing. And they watched this for over 20, 25 minutes, this light moving kind of through the woods there. Now, the interesting thing about this is another police officer shortly before this had found this woman, this older woman. She was stopped in the middle of the road in her car, and she wasn't moving, but the car was running. And when the police officer got out and he spoke to her, she was hysterical. She said she was driving her car, these lights came over, and her car stopped right there. And she was frozen. She didn't want to move. The lights went away and her car started up again. And she was afraid to then drive it away.
Wow.
So this went on, again, the over 20 minutes, the police officers and Norman Muscarello observed this whole thing. And it's never really been explained, but people have had some ideas. So we're going to talk a little bit about what some people thought they might have been, but in the end, nobody was able to explain this. And well, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that happened and what people were talking about.
I mean, they keep talking about this refueling plane, which, I mean, that's very tough to envision the boom on this refueling plane causing these lights,
Right. I mean, we had a situation going on. It was called Operation Big Blast. It was a training mission for B-47 bombers, okay? And that was going on over the weekend. Now here we have the newspaper article, and then we have Norman Muscarello and all the police officers that were involved. What was going on over the weekend was a thing called Operation Big Blast. Now, the base that they were using for this operation was a base for K-97 refueling tankers. We know that. So over that weekend, there was a lot of airplanes in the air, including that night. So right away, what people were saying is that what people saw was the refueling boom on this K-97 tanker. Because the refueling boom does have lights on it. Actually, the lights are right up in here. And it also has lights in the belly, but the lights in the belly are amber and green. When they get close, they turn green. They were not red. And the police officers and everybody involved described the lights that they saw moving at a 60-degree angle in the woods as red, and they were pulsating. These don't really pulsate. They'll blink at one point, but they don't pulsate. They blink when the plane gets in close, okay? So the first thing everybody was saying was, well, it's Operation Big Blast. They were refueling. They were doing something up there. Well, the thing was, according to the Air Force and Air Force logs, and the Air Force came out and said this, all their planes were on the ground 30 minutes before this sighting even happened. Now, if you know anything about the Air Force and their aircraft, they tend to know where they are.
They're very fussy about what's going on and where their aircraft are.
And when they don't know where they are, they're upset. But they said all aircraft was logged in on the ground by the time this event happened, which was closer to midnight. Then they started talking about these K-97 tankers, and there's a few problems with that. First of all, it's true that in this area and from this base, they would do refueling runs, and they would practice refueling using K-97 tankers. But because of Operation Big Blast this weekend, they did not want these tankers in the air. They were not part of the exercise, and they didn't need these big monsters flying through the air with all these other B-47s, which was a jet aircraft, flying through the air. So they grounded all the K-97s for the weekend. So it would make it hard for them to be up there. The next thing that we're talking about is they're saying, well, you had the refueling boom and you had the lights. Well, everybody agrees that the lights went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, up and down this thing, and they were red. Now, all the witnesses, the police, Norman Muscarello, and there were some other people who all saw this, all agreed that the lights, the lower end of the lights, the one that was closest to the ground, was the end that was moving forward. So it would be this end here would be moving forward.
So the plane would actually be going backward.
If it was a K-97, it would have to be flying backwards.
That's crazy.
Which is really not possible as far as we know. This explanation has been around for a while, and the interesting thing was, less than a year after this occurred, the Air Force came out and said it was not a K-97, it was not us. We didn't do it. To this day, the Air Force still has this listed as unexplained. Okay, so we talked to different people, and it's what could have happened here, what was it? Well, many people, and even people within the Air Force, believe this was a bona fide real event. It was an unidentified flying object. Okay, so unidentified in the sense where they didn't know what it was, and they didn't know where it came from, and it wasn't one of theirs. Could it have been something else? Sure. But then when you talk to certain people, at least the people that I spoke to, they said there are classified files out there that explain this in a little bit more detail, or in a way that they think what was going on here. So we know it wasn't a K-97 tanker. We know it wasn't Operation Big Blast.
Now,
okay?
Did they also think a theory that there was a secret mission going on? They didn't want anybody to know?
They did. They looked into the fact that there might have been some type of a secret test of some type of new technology. We're in this corridor where, you have New England, you have a lot of defense contractors. You have Boston. I mean, even you have MIT in Boston. You have United Technologies here in Connecticut. You had a bunch of different bases. So is it possible that this was one of our technologies that were being tested? So they did go into that in the Air Force, and even in the classified files, the answer was no, we were not testing anything on that night. First of all, it wouldn't be smart to test during a major operation or a training mission with B-47s and other aircraft. You had B-47s in the air. You also had other aircraft along with them, like F-4 Phantoms and that type of thing. They would be in the air at the same time. You don't want to that's not a place you would be testing this type of thing.
Quick question. Only because the way that the world is, if we were doing this big operation, couldn't it be a good possibility that some other country was over here doing something at the same time and maybe observing what we were doing, and that brought in some sort of other effect.
Not likely. How would they get in here?
I don't know.
I mean, them getting in here, even in the 60s, NORAD was pretty intense. There's no way that another country would be able to get in here. There's no way that if somebody was in here, unless they were really advanced with their technology, that every one of these aircraft, including the F-4 Phantom, which I don't know how many targets it could track, that was the newest aircraft at the time, would have spotted it, would have known that it was there.
It didn't show up on a radar either, right?
No. Well, and this is where the classified files start to talk about weird stuff. So are we going to talk about something weird here? We never talk about anything weird,
No,
right?
not us.
Okay.
No.
So it took time, but apparently over a course of years, they continued to study this, trying to find out what the answer was. So the people I was speaking with, one of them was an aeronautical engineer for the United States Air Force. He retired a full colonel. And the story with Paul was that if it flew, he knew about it, or he had seen it, or he knew something about it, or he was involved in designing it. And talking to him, the story he told was very interesting. And he started out by saying, you know, it doesn't matter how advanced you are with technology. It just seems that technology is going to fail. And you're going to have malfunctions on technology. And I said, you know, what are you trying to tell me here? It was a broken alien craft? He goes, it could happen. And apparently, according to these classified files, that's exactly what it was. And they believe that these things, you just don't see them. You see them when they malfunction. And they do malfunction. And this particular craft, they categorized as, we've talked about this before, the code name he called this was an Enigma. Enigma, do you remember what the Enigmas are versus the Dragonflies and the Cadillacs?
Well, that was
Didn't know you were going to be tested tonight, did you?
that was the Grays remotely, or
No,
the Grays that were actually flying.
Enigmas were robotically controlled
Yes,
aircraft,
yes.
where we'd be flying by some type of. We have robotically controlled aircraft today. We're not talking drones. We're talking about this. They would say would be a Gray. Gray
robotically controlled.
right.
Yep.
A Gray, which is basically a robot, would be controlling this. And when they had this issue, they would call them. Sometimes they just call them lemons.
Yeah.
You know, we've got a lemon here. There's another term. I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was Echo Tango. Echo. It was extraterrestrial down. Alpha Delta was an extraterrestrial down, and then there was one with an extraterrestrial malfunction, but I can't remember what that was. It was Echo something. And it's interesting because I've talked to ham radio operators where they said, "Hey, I've heard the call sign Echo Tango or Echo something." And he goes, "What is it?" I said, "Well, this is what I was told it was. I don't know if they're still using that call sign." But in the classified files, they're saying that they believe this was a damaged alien type of craft.
Well, you know, Rick.
It might have been a satellite, you know.
You know, Rick. What really was strange. Usually, when you talk about a UFO, it's going at a great speed. This thing here was not moving fast.
Well, they said it was kind of limping through the woods. That's the term they used. And it was wavering a bit. Now, we hear that description all the time when you hear about sightings of UFOs. It was fluttering like a leaf. But this one, they said, was kind of limping through the woods. It would go down, and it would kind of come up, and it was kind of limping through the woods. And then finally, it started to go up, and then the lights went out, and it disappeared.
So how long was this whole thing taking place as far as watching this thing that was limping in the woods? How long of a period of time?
When Muscarella was with the police officers, 20 to 25 minutes they watched this.
Okay.
He saw it prior to that, and then he ran to the police department, figured 10 minutes. So this whole thing was probably going on for 45 minutes at least to an hour.
Wow.
And the woman saw it a little bit
Nobody's
before
got
that.
pictures?
This is 1965.
I could have gone home and gotten the camera by then.
Right, if you thought that was going to be there. It was the middle of the night. He couldn't get
So
people at the
must
farmhouse.
be, I wonder, I mean, with today's technology, there's got to be new pictures of new things out there all the time.
Well, and that's the problem, because you have pictures, but what pictures can you believe?
Oh, yeah.
Right, with today's digital technology. The other thing is, I was looking at this thing, and I was thinking about writing this, and I know I'm just going to get people upset when I start with this.
That's what we're here for.
All right, but why is it that UFOs only appear at night?
Yeah.
As we call them, nocturnal lights. You rarely will hear about one during the day.
Can't see them during the day.
You can't, I mean, and then again, you don't really need running lights in space.
Right.
Okay.
No.
So the point here is what you're seeing most of the time, 99.9% of the time, is
Lights.
misidentification of a common object,
Yep.
a celestial event. All right. The story that I got and that we wrote about is that these things have absolute stealth. which 20 years ago you wouldn't have bought into. 30 years ago, you definitely would have said no.
Oh, yeah.
But then we learned about stealth in the 90s, which was around in the 70s.
Yeah, I mean, today they could hide there, you can't even see it.
It's absolute stealth. It's optical stealth. You can't see it.
If somebody ever told you that in 1965,
You wouldn't buy it.
they would put you away. They said there's something wrong with you.
They were talking about that. I mean, it's starting to come out a little bit now, I guess because the technology is getting older, that we have this total stealth capability where, some people want to call it cloaking because that's what you heard in Star Trek.
That's right, cloaking.
But they have it, and it was mentioned in a couple of speeches. The president mentioned it in one speech to the VFW when I think he was just getting excited when he said to these guys, because he was trying to present to them that we're protecting our country because that's what they want to hear. He said,
Excuse me, this was recently?
this was a few months ago.
Okay.
He said, we even have an airplane you can't see.
That's right.
All right, and then subsequent to that, it was mentioned by another speech by somebody else in the State Department. Yeah, we have an airplane. I remember when I was working on some of this stuff, while we didn't have invisible airplanes, we had airplanes you could talk to, and they would talk back, and they would do certain things based on what you did and what you told them to do. We had some issues with that, though, at the time. But what were the things that we saw from the ATIP project, Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, the things that they were working on, and that was, remember, that supposedly ended in 2012, had a lot to do with optics and invisibility and metallic glass and all this other stuff that you can't see with the naked eye anymore.
The scientists are starting to embrace this whole deal. Even your government, when the president of the country starts talking about a space force, what is he talking about?
Well, you know what? There's been a lot of articles lately, and you actually mentioned it a month or two ago, which is why is our government all of a sudden embracing the concept of extraterrestrial life? I mean, we're not just saying, oh, it might be there. We've got NASA coming out saying that the search for extraterrestrial life, intelligent extraterrestrial life, will now be a critical component of every mission. And they had a training program for teachers in grades 4 through 12, so they can now teach this to students. We're looking for life. Silvano Colombano, NASA Ames Space Center, came out with his white paper saying we've been looking in the wrong place. It's very likely all this exists. We need to change our approach to examining all this. You had the two...
Excuse me 1 second. I missed that in the bottle. What was that whole piece?
Silvano Colombano.
Okay, what is that?
He is a researcher at NASA Ames Space Research Center.
Okay.
He wrote a paper. We actually did it here on the show. He did a white paper, and he wrote that there are 4 things that we need to consider. One is that extraterrestrial life does in fact exist. 2, that interstellar travel is possible. 3, that communication will not be via standard radio waves.
You know, everybody's thinking...
Which we've been talking about, that SETI's wrong.
Everybody's thinking about radio. Well, guess what? Radio is not the future.
And there is a great spectrum. I mean, you couldn't talk about microwaves and that type of thing, but he said, no, they're not going to, an advanced race is not going to communicate in that means, and SETI's looking in the wrong place.
Excuse me, when you say white paper, define that, please.
A white paper is a research paper.
Research paper, yeah.
He came out and he said that, and the last thing he said is we need to take seriously some of these UFO reports. He agreed 99.9% or nothing, okay? But he came out and he said, this is what we need to do. The 2 scientists from Harvard, the Harvard-Smithsonian Research Center, the Oumuamua, that space rock that came through.
That's right.
They still, and they're sticking by their story, firmly believe this is some type of extraterrestrial craft. Or a piece of some extraterrestrial civilization.
Observing us.
They believe it could have even been a craft that they used many thousands of years ago that broke and it's just flying through space at this point. You have NASA. You have a lot of the big universities. Now, everybody else is making this turn where they're saying, well, yeah, this is all possible. Then, of course, what we found through our own space probes, Saturn, on the moons of Saturn, organic material was found. In the rings of Saturn, organic material. There was one the other day. This is really interesting to me. NASA was talking about, in their weekly presentation, they were talking about how they've now drilled down into the surface of Mars. And they said, they believe now that asteroids could have contributed to ancient life on Mars. 2 things there. One is they're conceding that there was ancient life on Mars. 1. Two is they're saying it could have come from an asteroid. That's a theory called the panspermia theory, which some people believe that life on Earth could have started either from a crash of a comet and organic materials or molecules on there, or perhaps asteroids when they were raining down in the early development of Earth. And people said, no. Now, all of a sudden, it could have happened on Mars, and people are starting to believe it could have happened here.
Here, absolutely.
So all of this stuff, what does it have to do with Exeter? What it has to do with Exeter is that all this stuff that at one point we were saying was wild speculation may in fact have been more true than we want to believe. And I picked out Exeter, again, because it's close to home. And there was a book written, Incident at Exeter. This is one of the first books I ever read on UFOs, Incident at Exeter by John Fuller. It's really good. And I'll tell you the whole story. It's close to home, and it's never been explained by the Air Force. And even the people I spoke to, who were very high-level people who, told me everything I knew about the book I put together and all this backroom stuff and secret stuff, they admitted this one has never been explained. They don't understand it. They believe it was a malfunctioning extraterrestrial craft. So, Echo Delta or Echo.
Just the fact that they celebrate this event every year is telling you something.
Well, they love that. So.
It must be good. We got this a road trip.
I keep saying that. It is a road trip. It is a road sure.
You have?
I mean, I've been to it. Yeah. I mean, we could contact them and say, hey, we're going to come down the day before and we're going to shoot a show.
Absolutely. Yep.
But it's an interesting one. Look up the incident at Exeter.
Excuse me. Do they get is it like an ongoing tourist scene up there?
Not ongoing.
Not like they do out in the other parts of the country. Okay.
But when you go there, you can find a lot of, like if you go in the bookstore, these are hard to find, the originals, but you go in the bookstore, they just stock up on those. I don't know where they get them from. Apparently they got these from a library somewhere. I don't know where they came from. But they stock, I had one of my own. I don't know what happened to it. So, yeah, it's pretty interesting. They have a parade where the kids dress up as aliens and they create saucers. They have speakers that go there, and some are good and some not so good. So they have a lot of different things that go on there.
Yeah, so there is a little bit of a theme there.
Oh, yeah.
It's there all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Road trip. I could see it coming.
Oh, absolutely. So, again, just to summarize what we were talking about, at Exeter, September of 1965, it was observed by one man, 2 police officers, a number of other witnesses. Cars, shut down and restarted themselves. Animals were disturbed by the lights and the sounds, apparently, that they heard.
Hey.
But this was all stuff that, sounds a lot like what they showed us in Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Close Encounters, if you look at Close Encounters, a lot of the stuff that you see in there is based on other things.
Okay.
A lot of it.
Yeah.
So.
With the cars going on and off and the animals and all that kind of stuff.
And also there's that one scene where they're monitoring everything and they say, we monitor no biologics in this craft.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Grays aren't biologics.
Just the fact that even today, it's unexplained. They cannot explain what happened that day.
And the Air Force isn't trying to. They said it wasn't us, and they left it. They don't touch it anymore. Was this investigated by Blue Book? Not really. They didn't really do much at all about it.
And Blue Book is?
Project Blue Book is the whole UFO investigation by the Air Force that ran until '68.
Yeah.
Okay, 30.
I'm just reminding them so they know that I just want to make sure.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Nice one, Larry. This is a good job.
I'll tell you, this event, I remember when it happened, Rick.
Yeah.
And it's so intriguing, and the mystique is still there.
Yeah. All right.
Well, I want to thank you, Rick, tonight. As usual, you're right in your game. And I want to remind everybody, please email us at theviewshow@AOL.com. We want to have your viewpoint on this subject and hope to talk to you soon. Thank you for watching tonight.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.